I made the decision a while ago that I wouldn't bring my set of slides. Boy, am I glad I do. Starting up with a big slide set. I've done it a few times at this time of night and it didn't work very well. So what I want to do for a crowd like this that I'll bet knows all you might say the standard scientific information, is I really want to zoom into what's happening right now. Because after 20 years of working on the science, this is now showtime for the politics. And it has started in Washington a week ago. And this is what we've been waiting for all these years. Now I'm kind of scared because there's no more just stalling for tomorrow. In a way, when George Bush was there, we could kind of coast along saying, well, nothing's going to happen anyway. But now the politicians, the political environment is set, and their hearings have started on the Waxman-Markey bill in the House Committee on Energy and Environment, I think it is. There's so many of those committees, I don't keep those things as straight as I should. But they, a week ago, started hearings on what to us is the big climate and energy bill. And in a way there was good news. They had 68 different people giving testimony, and they invited no climate scientists. And to me that was good news. They didn't need to hear from us anymore. That was in the bag. And I thought that was tremendous. We did not have to grind through all the slides that I'm not showing you tonight, because that we've ground through those so many times that to us we're getting tired of just, here they are again. Here's the Greenland ice sheet melt rate, and here's the ocean acidification rate, and on we go. And we like to think as climate scientists that we ought to be past that. Well, in Washington they are. They did not need to hear from us. So to me that was great news. The one summary I will give you, I guess I'd call it an update of the science that I think is important, is our IPCC report is now 2 years old, and actually our writing of it is almost 3 years old. And in most fields, 2 or 3 years, big deal. In this field, 2 or 3 years means you have to do an update. And so there's a couple of updates that are pretty important to know about. Since we wrote the IPCC report, we now have more evidence that the Greenland ice sheet is melting faster than we thought. And one of the things people really don't understand is that the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that got the Nobel Peace Prize, is actually a pretty conservative document. A lot of the contrarian crowd likes to talk about how all the IPCC report exaggerated everything. Guess what? It's the opposite of that. We had so many levels of review and re-review and re-review that it's actually a very conservative document in what was specifically stated. And probably the issue that was most conservatively stated was the rate of sea level rise. And this Greenland ice sheet acceleration specifically relates to accelerating sea level rise. And I think what we had in the document was by 2100 sea level going up between 30 and 60 centimeters. We now figure it'll probably be a meter. And of course in Montana we don't care about that. Make it 10 meter for all we care. But if you're on the coastline, a meter is a really big deal. Even 30 centimeters makes you nervous, and every city along the coastlines worldwide, a meter is a huge deal. And in fact, my colleague Jim Hansen says that he sees sea level rise as the single biggest impact to humanity, because so many of our biggest cities are on coastlines. And so that one update is a very important update. It's bounced around in the scientific literature literally week to week. I've never seen anything like it in my career, where you think you know something one month and a month later a new blockbuster paper comes out that resets what we thought we knew about critical facts. Science normally doesn't move this fast. The other critical update that I think is worthwhile for you all to understand is when the climate model runs were done for that report, they were done almost 8 years ago now, in 2001. And at the time, there were, as they were called, scenarios used to guesstimate what the rate of CO2 emissions would be by humanity, actually all the way to 2100. Okay, so these scenarios were put in, and some of them were very, imagined very progressive adoption of alternative energy and things like that. And then others were various stages of what they call business as usual, to the one scenario that was really pedal to the metal economics. I call it the Dick Cheney scenario. And if there's any Republicans here, too bad, that's what I call it. And guess what? We now have 8 years of real data. We are doing, as humanity, worse than the Dick Cheney scenario. Worse. Worse. And I'll have to say that we as earth scientists are, I don't quite want to say panicking, but if we're doing worse than the Dick Cheney scenario, and the Dick Cheney scenario takes us to a 10-degree warming by the time your grandchildren lives by 2100. 10 degrees. We're doing worse than that. And so what we see, and this isn't a model projection, this is literally what humanity has done between 2001 and 2009. This is measured emissions. And we're seeing them doing worse than what we even imagined was possible back in 2001. And so we're finding we're pleased that in Washington now we do have an administration that is ready to get to work. But what we're already seeing is the counterattack. And I brought for my one prop of the night, instead of a bunch of PowerPoints, these have been in the Missoula paper for months already now, haven't they? This is the fossil fuel industry starting to counterattack. Before the bill was even submitted, these have been in the Missoulian for months. New energy tax is a sure way to hobble our economy, and why America doesn't need this. And so we as climate scientists are realizing that the battle is now on. The real deal has now arrived. And I was in Washington just, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the people in the environmental lobbies and NGOs and the various groups, they say this is it. This is now showtime. And we, in a way, it's good that we don't have to revisit all the climate facts, but now we really are finding out what the political leaders of the country are willing to do, and what the American public is willing to do. And just yesterday, I read on a website that I follow for the legislative issues, Climate Wire, and they said they originally planned hearings for next week on this bill, and they postponed it because they don't think they have enough votes. So if you think climate legislation is going to coast right through Congress because it's so obvious the trouble we're in, I got news for you. We're not sure that a bill's going to pass. And particularly, the reason that matters, not only to change the momentum of the U.S., but why we as climate scientists see this as particularly a critical period of months, not even years, but months, is the COP15 negotiations for the Kyoto 2 language. The follow-on from the original Kyoto Protocol is supposed to be negotiated in Copenhagen in December. Okay, how many months is it from now till December? And we're starting to imagine that if the U.S. delegation, despite, I think, the good intentions of the Obama administration, every signal I see from the administration is that they absolutely get it. And they absolutely want to push forward the things that need to be done at the speed that needs to be done. But they can, of course, just force this through Congress, including not only Republican, but a number of Democratic legislators that are not ready to vote for any kind of climate change or oriented carbon emission controls, cap and trade or carbon taxes. We could, if you want to ask questions on that later, I won't go through those sort of mechanics right now. But there are not the guaranteed votes right now ready to pass this legislation. And my international friends say that if they don't see any way the COP15 negotiations in Copenhagen in December can be successful if the U.S. shows up without serious legislation from our country. And here we are with all the signals right now this week saying that there aren't the votes there. And so this is, I'm learning a lot of first-hand politics. And this is no longer sciencey. This is not science anymore. Nobody's arguing the science one bit. And so this is really the kind of thing that the American public needs to understand, that this is no longer idle theoretical discussion. These bills are coming in front of Congress, and in the House committee right now, the Senate has not started a bill yet, although I think Senator Boxer said she's ready to submit one. And so literally right at the moment, the Obama administration is working behind the scenes, which is, I guess, the way all this goes. Is most of the real stuff happens behind the scenes before it gets to open committee in the floor. And they're working behind the scenes to build the political momentum for a Senate bill to be introduced and for this House bill to get out of committee. Now, in the website that I follow, it was kind of interesting. They listed both of our senators as on the fence. I don't think Senator Tester is actually on the fence. I've talked to him a number of times in the last 4 or 5 months. And what I imagine is he's just keeping his powder dry, as the saying goes. I don't think there's any risk. And I wish I could say the same with Senator Caucus. Max told me he actually went with Al Gore to the original Kyoto meeting. I didn't know that. So he's been engaged in this issue from the very beginning. But he's being real coy about where his vote will go. And meanwhile, he says point blank that his priority is health care here. And so I hope he succeeds in that also. But he's kind of using that as a bit of a shield to not make any commitment of what he's going to do on a climate bill. And so that's kind of curious too. And so, Congressman Reberg's office, I just don't have much interaction with, so I have no clue. I can kind of imagine, but I don't really have much of any idea where they may be headed. And so, this is after, for some of you in Missoula, you've been hearing me give talks for how many years now? Too many, yeah, too many. And it is showtime now. There's no more science talks needed. And for a group like yours, this is the time to be, you're better politicians than I am, and this is the time to be putting the squeeze on the politicians. Yeah, there's no need to talk to scientists anymore. It's time to put the squeeze on the politicians. Simple as that. Let me talk a little bit about some of the things we're thinking about more around our region and around Montana. I've written some papers myself and covered the material for the IPCC report on western wildfires and climate change. And also, actually, here's a good example of another topic that has changed significantly, literally in the 3 years since I wrote my IPCC text. It's becoming very clear that we're getting a mountain pine beetle epidemic of magnitudes that are not historic, that are super historic, that start from the middle of British Columbia and have already gone all the way to Colorado. And so it's really pretty clear that the Northern Rockies forest ecosystem is under significant stress. And so I was tasked by one group it's turned out to be an interesting challenge. They said, don't rehash all the climate science. We believe what you've already written. Tell us what you want us to do. And gee, for an academic, that was actually kind of shocking. Because, okay, now I have to imagine myself as the forest supervisor on the LOA or something equivalent and say, if I was in charge of land management, what would I do? And so I've been on this for about a year now. I've thought through this through every which way. And I would really like to see in our part of the world us get to a very active and organized activity on forest restoration that starts with harvest of probably something, I'm going to just take some rough numbers, probably 30 to 50% of the trees that are on the landscape right now. The difference between this and old industrial logging is back then they took the 50% biggest trees. With forest restoration, you take the 50% smallest trees and leave the biggest trees for a forest. And I think we better get to work on this pronto, or else we're going to just have all of them die and burn up. And the second half of this concept is starting to really mature, that we actually have a huge biofuel resource out there. It is absolutely crazy how much money that the U.S. government has spent subsidizing corn ethanol in the last 5 years. When we have equivalent bioenergy on our hillsides that is dying from stress and bug kill and is already grown. And the benefit cost ratio of selectively harvesting these forests and using as a bioenergy source is about 5 times better than corn ethanol. And yet you see billions and billions and billions of subsidy dollars that have been pumped into corn ethanol in the Midwest. And to me, a restoration and bioenergy system is about the only thing I can see actively to go try to get ahead of this whole train of events in our forest. We are aridifying in this part of the world. The 50-year climate trend, I show graphs at every public talk, that it slowly is getting certainly warmer with no extra precip. We've calculated that we need to get, what was it? Oh man, I'm supposed to remember it. I think it was about a ½ inch more rain per decade would be enough to match the increasing temperatures. Well, guess what? We're not getting a ½ inch more per decade. So little by little, as it's getting warmer, it's getting drier. Well, as it gets drier, we have too many trees on the landscape. Simple as that. And so we either wait until they all die and then all burn up, or we can get to work on this kind of restoration and bioenergy system. And there really isn't any other alternative. And so when I try to be proactive about what we literally need to start doing around here, that's the single biggest thing I come up with. Part of an activity like that done well will actually help our other problem. And the other big ecological problem that I've identified for our part of the country is that we are losing our late summer streamfall. That when the snow melts a month early and it's hot and warmer and drier all through the summer, by the time August comes around, our stream flow is, we've measured it, on average 30% lower than it was 50 years ago. And of course in the Columbia, nobody noticed, but in all our little higher orders, or lower order streams like the Big Hole is a great example, that are pretty small, they are just literally being dewatered. They're getting to the point where there's almost no active flow by August on many years. And of course, we've all seen that Fish and Game is having to close down trout fishing. Well, that problem isn't going to solve itself. It's going to do nothing but get worse. And we've already hit the wall on our drier summers. And part of what the forest restoration activity would do was would be to help aid a bit of stream flow. Because the trees that you would take off would be transpiring phytoelements, is what the theoreticians call trees, that would aid some of the summer stream flow. Now, I don't kid myself, that's enough to restore a summer stream flow. And in fact, we're going to have to get quite serious about water management and water rights in the coming decades throughout the West. And the Colorado River Basin has already hit the wall. We're a little bit behind this, but water in the West is, water and fires are, to me, the two things that are going to hit us the way sea level rise hits the coast. And so I think this forest restoration will help on the water issue, but I think we're going to have some very innovative thinking on water rights and water management. And whenever I try this out on like lawyers that specialize in water rights, they just laugh at me. They say just no chance. There's no chance this is going to. And at some point as an earth scientist, you say, well, if the molecules aren't there, you can sue people all you want. The molecules still aren't there. And sooner or later, reality has to hit, doesn't it? Maybe not. Maybe not. And so I'm trying to give them advance warning that they better get some thinking on water management going right quick. I think the last comment I'll make, is a topic that I'm not very expert on at all, but I think it's something that the American public better step back from their prejudices and at least think about again, and that's nuclear energy. Now, we've all been through the last 30, 40 years of nuclear power, and one of the things that's kind of odd is people talk about how dangerous it is. There have been a lot more fatalities from coal mining than the entire nuclear energy in the whole world, including Chernobyl. And of course, Chernobyl is an anomaly to begin with, but there really isn't a huge immediate safety issue with nuclear power as much as the American public thinks of. The other thing about nuclear power that the American public needs to get educated in is that every nuclear power plant is not created equal. And there are designs now that are dramatically more efficient than all the power plants that we have in place now that are 20 or 30 years old. And probably the single biggest factor that I think is worth knowing is that the nuclear power plants that are in place now, you take a certain amount of the fuel and put in that power plant, it only uses 2% of it. It starts at 100%. By 98 or 97%, it has dropped below because of the way they built those plants for safety reasons. It drops to the point where it no longer has a high enough density to continue power production. Well, you still have 97% of the thermochemical energy still there. Well, now it's a waste problem. So the reason the nuclear waste problem is such a disaster is because that stuff is still really hot. The new nuclear power designs use the fuel all the way down to only about 5% or even 3% of the original power production. And so they not only use, 20 times, 15 times more of the original inherent energy source, but you end with a waste product that's dramatically less, I don't think so well this time of night, less dangerous, and that the decay, the radioactive decays is done in a couple of hundred years instead of tens of thousands of years. So you not only up front have 10 times as much available energy because you're using the entire energy, potential energy of that radioactive material more completely, but you're ending up with a dramatically less toxic waste product at the end. And I'll bet there isn't 1% of the American public that understands that. They just hear nuclear power and they say, no way, I'm not interested. And I think if they knew those two facts and the fact that if you say no to nuclear power, you have to say yes to something else. This is not just say no and go home. Some sort of electric power is needed, and if you decide nuclear power isn't for you, then what are you going to do? Build some more coal strips? We're building wind turbines and solar cells as fast as we can. I'm not trying to downplay those at all. I think there's a lot of momentum in those fields, but every single thing I read says they can't be enough. They can't be enough. And so we either keep burning coal, or we are going to have to think of something else. The reason I bring it up to a group like this is I think you need to be willing to at least re-educate yourself about what new generation nuclear power is like. Because I can see us being pushed into a corner in electric power production in the U.S. and pretty much the standard alternative that's offered to us is coal plants. And unless we come up with something else for that magnitude of electric power production, they're going to keep burning. And in fact, it was an interesting statistic I read. Coal plants actually emit more radioactivity than a nuclear power plant does. Because there's natural radioactive material in coal, and all of it goes up the stack. So a coal plant literally emits more radioactivity than a nuke. If you don't believe me, look that one up. And if you find out I'm wrong, let me know. Because I double and triple checked that. Because I thought that was a pretty amazing fact. So I'll just end by commenting on a part-time Montanan, Jared Diamond, the author of Guns, Germs, and Steel. How many of you read his book, Collapse? Yeah, in this crowd, a fair number of them. It's kind of, and of course, particularly for those of you who haven't, he summers in the Bitterroot, just down the street from us. And the first 53 pages of Collapse is all about Montana. And the point of his entire book is that if humans think that we somehow are above the laws of nature, humans have ignored warning signs before, and their civilizations have collapsed. And he and we as scientists can clearly see that the Earth doesn't need us. We need the Earth. I mean, we could all be wiped out tomorrow and the Earth could keep chugging along just fine. Who knows? Cockroaches might take over next, for all we know. But there's no guarantee one bit that humans just have the inherent right to populate the planet for posterity. If we screw up bad enough, long enough, we'll just be wiped out. And his book on Collapse is a very good illustration of where in smaller civilizations it's happened numerous times in the past, and now we're playing poker with the whole planet. And so I really hope that our politicians are ready to understand the magnitude of what we have in front of us here, because we literally are exceeding the Dick Cheney curve right now. The momentum of humanity right now is on the road to ruin. And How soon till we wise up? I don't know. But let's hope it's soon, and let's hope that with a group like yours that has a lot of political activity, I mean, we need to be talking to all of these particularly national political leaders, and not next year, I mean next week and next month, because it is absolutely showtime right now. So with that, I'll answer, I don't know, I can answer me. Oh yeah, I'll answer questions too.
How come it says snowing in my yard?
Oh man, that's slide number 2 of my talk. What is the difference between weather and climate? Well, climate is trends that build over decades. I'm actually very happy to see a couple of cool years around Montana, because a few years ago I was thinking, man, are we going to make it through the century? And so seeing some of these nice, cool, wet springs and late snows. 50 years ago, this happened every year. People think this is so amazing. Go look at the records. 50 years ago, this would have been a normal spring. Now we talk about how cool and cloudy and snowy it is. Now it's the exception instead of normal. Uh-oh, Sarah. Okay.
Steve, what is in this bill that you're talking about? What are the main points that you really want to see passed by Congress?
Steve, would you help me phrase or restate
Yeah.
the question?
What are the main points of this Waxman-Markey bill? One of the things I didn't take time to talk about, and one of the things that the Obama administration is already doing is within current departmental regulations, they can set the stage and do a number of valuable things. Like you read about EPA now defining CO2 as a pollutant, so they can start regulatory activity on CO2. The Supreme Court authorized that 2 years ago. The Bush administration dragged their heels, and we knew the day the Obama administration hit and the EPA administrator that he chose that would be changing, and sure enough, it's changed. So there's regulatory activity within the agencies that already is getting going. Increasing the car mileage standards. They're already doing that. And so those are the things that are underway from current regulatory activity. And so that's all necessary momentum. What the big thing with this bill is some sort of cost on carbon emission. The argument is a carbon tax or a carbon tariff or a cap and trade, but the real bottom line, what this is all about, is if you're emitting carbon, you're going to pay for it, and progressively, and it won't hit overnight. The typical strategy is that a trajectory of a progressive taxation or progressively lower tax caps will be imposed, so that any industry that's a carbon emitter is going to be progressively paying. Now, you know, in a way it's kind of ironic that we figured this out in water pollution decades ago, that we don't just let an industry just dump raw material into our waterways anymore. And so now we are really letting emitters, of which every one of us was one of them getting here tonight, use the atmosphere as a free garbage can. That's literally what's going on. From a pollution control point of view, this is really the basics of CO2 emission as a pollutant being a free emission to the atmosphere. You don't have to pay at all. What that bill is after is some mechanism to set a trajectory where carbon emission will cost money, and it'll cost more and more and more money to any emitting entities. Now they are these are aimed not as individuals, because it would be just impossible to impose. So these are all at emission sources of a certain size, which are primarily the electric power generation industry and other major industry. The other half of what's going on here is that if the cost of electricity coming from the coal plant rises high enough, then solar panel on your rooftop starts making more sense. And so this is incentivizing alternatives. Now, you recognize that right now the fossil fuel industry has a monopoly virtually on energy that we all use. And geez, they love this monopoly. And you know darn well that if the price of oil went to $200 a barrel tomorrow, we'd all be paying, because we don't have any alternatives yet. Well, they don't want us to have any alternatives. That's exactly what this is about. But I think I think we can all see in a wider sense that society better be coming up with alternatives in the next few decades. And they're not going to arrive overnight, which is why we think we better get started. And we need alternatives to these fuels, because number one, they're not going to last forever, and number two, they're the source of the climate change that we're already documenting. But yes, imagine as a politician trying to argue for raising the price of a gallon of gas to $6 or $8, which is where it needs to go. And I've talked to some of the politicians. I say, now, how do you plan on doing this? Because nothing is a hot button to Americans more than the price of a gallon of gas at the pump. And yet we really need that to go to $8 a gallon. And I think we'd be amazed how much our gas consumption would go down. It's already started to go down. And it's absolutely where we need it to go is down. And yet for a politician to stand up and say, yeah, I just voted for this bill that is going to raise gas to $8 a gallon. That's what people like me are asking them to do, but I think we can all be as realists. Think of how tough that is for a politician to do.
Steve, you're talking about reinventing of our forests.
Yeah.
Lots of the long-term conservation groups have spent lots of time and lots of money fighting forest, cutting trees and cutting down the trees. Is there any dialogue between you as climate scientists and them as conservationists about how to do this?
In our part of the world, there hasn't been much yet. And I'll be the first to say that I know exactly what industrial forestry was 30 years ago when I got here. That was right when the famous Bowley report came out. That was a firestorm in national forest management politics because of how bad industrial logging was trashing our landscape. And you can see the scars to this day. And so I don't at all belittle how bad forest management had been in the past, but we have to get past that. And forest restoration that we're talking about nowadays, as I say, leaves the biggest trees there rather than cutting them and hauling them to Bonner. And so it's a very different type of forest harvest. And the real bottom line is these trees are going to die and burn up if we don't. And we're seeing the evidence of that already well underway. So that is not hyperbole based on some computer model. And so if we don't get to work on our forest, the summer's going to come when everything goes wrong like 1910, and we're in big trouble. And you put the other half of that together, meanwhile we're burning all this coal for electric power, and we've got all these millions of acres of dead trees. Why don't we burn at least some of those for power? And I'm not in any way suggesting that we cut all of them everywhere. There's certainly going to be steep slopes, riparian areas, where even if they're dead, that's not the place to be cutting them. But we definitely, kind of like this just categorical mindset against nuclear power, I think there's parts of especially our Montana public, that have to get past this. Anytime a chainsaw starts, it's bad news. Because that just isn't true. And we need some chainsaws to start quick and get to work on some of this forest. Yeah.
I wonder if you tried to educate the union of concerned scientists about nuclear power, because they're still preaching against it.
Oh, I know. The nuclear power issue is on a national scale very interesting to watch, because unless people educate themselves to the new generation power plant designs, they fall back to the problems of the past plants that were real problems. I'm not saying those were false problems, but you can't assume that a power plant designed in 1970 and a power plant designed in 2010 are equivalent. Nothing else is. Why would you expect a nuclear plant to still be the same design? They have a significantly new design, and I can't say that I'm ready to just rubber stamp nuclear power all the way, but I am ready to have an open discussion about nuclear power where we hear about these details from the experts, of which I'm not in nuclear power. But I've heard just enough to be dangerous. Yeah.
What about France? In France, about 40% of their energy comes from 80%
of their electric power comes from nuclear plant, and they're actually the old ones. And so, from a safety point of view, these plants, with the exceptions of Chernobyl really alone, have an amazing safety record. And so, yeah, France has been, most of their power production is nuclear power for decades. Yeah.
When you talk about forest restoration and cutting the smaller trees, are you talking about, well, is this mostly to prevent them from being killed by pine beetles? Because
The small trees are not what the pine beetles get. It's a little more complicated than that. Let me start with the concept of carrying capacity. Probably everybody's heard of that term, typically used for wildlife or maybe range management and cattle grazing. In a biophysical way, a landscape has a carrying capacity also. Okay? And so when you have a forest growing from scratch, actually thousands and thousands of more seedlings germinate than can ever sort of live to maturity. And if you allow that forest to grow on its own, you end up with a forest that has more trees than its carrying capacity. And of course, in a natural system, after a while, they just die off either from bugs or stress, and then they burn up, and that's it. So it isn't that this is unnatural. It's just that it isn't very convenient for humans. And so since it's very clear to us that a lot of our forest cover here is overgrown, their environment, we really have a lot of forests that just literally have more trees than the site can support. And so you could cut the big ones down and let the little ones grow. It's not so much of, from a pure ecological point of view, it's just that there's too many trees. for the site to support. And as it gets warmer and drier, they support even less. And so as we go in, as we continue in this drying phase, that our climate trajectory is in, we're actually going to be able to support less and less trees. We're really, Montana's kind of sliding towards a Utah sort of climate. So if probably going and looking at the landscape down around Salt Lake City is where western Montana will be maybe 100 years from now. And there's way less trees than there are here, aren't there? So how are all those trees going to go away? They're going to either burn up or we're going to harvest them in restoration. That's pretty much the two choices. Because they are going to go away if the climate continues the trend it's on. There's no two ways about it. No.
But if you cut all of the smaller trees, those are the ones that are absorbing most CO2.
That isn't as true as people think it is.
You know, the large trees.
It's often thought that the youngest trees are absorbing most of the CO2 and older trees aren't hardly absorbing much CO2 at all. And in the extreme of really old trees, that might become true. But there are very accurate carbon flux measurements made by a certain class of instruments that have been pioneered in the last 20 years. We know these carbon fluxes very well. So this is not just guesswork or computer models. And it's been illustrated over and over that larger trees are not nearly the weak carbon uptake source that is often suggested. Yeah, Gary.
Dean, I guess here, I don't know whether I should. Sorry, go ahead.
Are you a guest here?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So Claudia's the official member? Oh, she's a guest too.
At any rate, you're suggesting that we take the small trees, and we're talking national forest. How about the rest of the weather clock, if we do that? When are we not going to, or when are we going to forget taking the small stuff and think about the rest of the weather clock?
Well, the first thing it would be nice to be able to do is leave all the needles behind, because that's the nutrient source. Wood has almost no nutrients, and so the best way to do this would be that the trees that are cut out, that you cut the twigs and needles off and leave on site for the next stand in nutrient capital. The other thing, I am putting this out as a concept, not a specific prescription. In any piece of land, you still have a choice of what size and age distribution of the trees you cut out. Maybe you decide you want to leave some of the little ones. And so this is really about getting the overall leaf area of that ecosystem down. That's what this is about, because it's leaf area that transpires water and generates stress. And so the whole purpose of this is getting leaf area off that site. And one of the first papers I published in my career in 1977 was relating site water balance to leaf area forest. And as the site water balance is going down, as it's getting warmer and drier, this leaf area has to go down too. And so whichever tree you choose to cut is a site-by-site decision somebody else can make. But somebody better get out there and start cutting some trees out, or they're all going to die and burn up. And it's not every tree everywhere, but we better get to cutting some trees. Yeah.
And it seems like that theory is more applicable to even age logical kinds of forests, which isn't what I wanted to ask about.
No, it isn't, but go ahead. I mean, it's a basic biophysical balance of any forest.
What about the plants to convert the biomass to energy? Do we have the capability now in Montana? Is it low carbon emitting, and how accessible is it to our communities?
This is there are prototypes for mobile generators that can take, we'll call it forest residue, and burn and generate electric power and put onto the grid. Now, when I gave this concept in Washington, D.C. about a month ago, a guy came up afterwards and said, I think we need to talk. I'm the chairman of Northwestern Energy. And needless to say, Northwestern Energy has to be part of this for it to work, because there are technical details about how efficiently you could actually do this that are not fully just easily arranged yet. There are mobile generator prototypes around, so they do exist. We've had a program around Montana for a few years called Fuels for Schools, where they've retrofitted oil-fired heating systems in schools with wood fuel. And the best from a pure energetics point of view is when you can use the heat and electric power generation, so a cogen, as the lingo calls it, because producing power alone, you can only get maybe 40 to 50% efficiency. A cogeneration facility, they say they can get to 90% efficiency, because then the heat that is not enough to generate electric power is still enough for heating purposes. So the ideal solution would be cogeneration facilities scattered around that would be able to do that. Now, one of the fundamental parts of an idea like this is decentralization of our electric power production. When you think of it, for our lifetimes, electric power has been generated by a handful of gigantic plants, Colstrip, Grand Coulee Dam sort of places. The future is not going to be that way. We've maxed out on those sort of ideas. Future electric power production is going to be progressively decentralized, maybe to the point where every single rooftop has a little solar panel and putting a little bit of juice into the system. And so we are going to turn a corner in the next few decades of dramatically rebalancing how electric power is produced in worldwide, and it's going to be more and more and more and more decentralized. Of course, the power companies are petrified of this, but there isn't any alternative. They're just, except maybe some of these giant nuclear plants. I don't really want a lot of those. I want just enough. And so I think we need to start thinking of a future where conceivably every building would have at least a partial solar surface and be a partial power generator. Every little ranch would have its own little wind turbine. Every little area might have one of these little biomass energy producing sources. And so a dramatic decentralization of electric power is almost certainly where the next 30 years will go.
What does Bob Rowe have to say about that?
All for it. Yeah, and of course the PUC is going to be a part in every state, the Public Utilities Commissions, of this sort of restructuring of the grid. Now, how many billions in the big stimulus package that was voted straight away when Obama hit office, deep down inside that is something like $14 billion for a new smart grid development. So they know full well that for all these other things to happen starts with a way smarter electric power grid than we have now. And there are a lot of things where the technology exists right today and we just haven't deployed it. Lots and lots of things. And so that already in the regulatory environment and the agency environment is underway. And they have money to do it from that stimulus.
Can we do more in the area of conservation, or have we reached a point where
No, we haven't even started. We haven't even started. A graph I like to use in my talks, I first suggest to the audience that we could cut our electric power use in half. And of course, it's fun to see them all yell, no. And then my next slide shows that California's already done it. The per capita electric use of California is about half of the whole rest of the country. And so we could, with technology that they've been using for decades, we could cut our electric use in half tomorrow when we get to work. So that's a no-brainer. That's so obvious it's sickening.
I read the paper where Schweitzer has been talking about $1.8 billion that will be educational trust fund for the state if we just run the poll. So,
Yes. I don't get it. Yeah, I know he knows better, because I've heard him say the things that need to be said, and then he stands up and says stuff like that. I mean, the faster we quit burning coal everywhere on the earth, the better off we are. It's the single biggest carbon emitter of anything that happens, is coal-fired electricity. And in fact, to give you a good number, Colstrip out here uses 2 train loads of coal a day. And that's not train cars. That's 2 100-car trains. So that's 200 trains of coal a day. I figured it out. It's a whole car every 7 minutes. Starts the day in the ground and ends the day in the air. A train car every 7 minutes. And we have hundreds of those coal-fired power plants in the country, and every one of them of that size or that same sort of pace. A train car every 7 minutes. And it's into the air within an hour.
Have we reached the tipping point, or?
We might have. The sad truth for us as earth scientists is kind of like peak oil. We won't know that it was peak oil until after we're past, which we think we may be in peak oil. And the same with some of these critical tipping points. We won't realize we tipped until the tip has occurred. And then we'll go, oh man, now we're in for it. And so the Greenland ice sheet is probably the one, and the Arctic sea ice are the things that are being watched most closely and seem to be accelerating most rapidly. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about why Northwestern Energy would be interested in sort of the individual independence of energy production? I mean, we want to sell to California because they pay more.
Now, that's a perfect question, and it really illustrates that we as the public are asking a very illogical thing for a power company to do, to go to a whole lot more work and more expense to generate power. And so we can't rely on the power companies to make these transitions happen, period, because they're, from a business point of view, they're counterintuitive. Even the conservation things. Since when can you expect a business to voluntarily sell less of its product? And think of it, that's what we're doing. We're saying, would you please work with all your customers to sell less of your power? That's crazy. And so we have to step back beyond the power companies to some wider playing field, like government, and make rules that force that to happen. Because for us to ask the power companies to do it on their own is just nonsensical. And even though at least some of them try to put up a good front, we're asking an illogical business decision on their part. So we really have to take these sort of efficiency improvements, grid improvements, conservation improvements back to a larger level of societal decision making, because it's just not fair to try to force that on. Did I wear them down?
I think so.
Geez, I ain't even tired yet.
I can think of another question. Thanks to all of you for coming, and if you haven't finished your dessert yet, go ahead, and we'll see the 8 people tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock at the fire station. And I'm sure that Steve's given us a lot of things to add to what